My name is Claire Kearns, and I'm with the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is here today along with two students to talk about the ERA. The ERA, amazingly, 80% of people nowadays, if they're polled, either don't know what the ERA is or they think that the ERA is already part of the Constitution. So we are here today to talk about what the ERA is really about. And we're going to start with Harlan Shropshire, a League of Women Voters member, and she is going to talk about some of the experiences from decades ago that women went through.
When I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, it was part of our culture to treat women and girls as inferior beings. As an example, there were no organized sports for women as there are today. We just had PE classes or intramural competitions. We played girls' basketball, in which you were only allowed to travel halfway down the court. There were 3 girls at each end. When you got to the middle, you had to pass it off to the other girls. You were too fragile to go down the whole court. After marriage, the husband was the breadwinner. The wife stayed home and took care of the house and the kids. Women had to fight to become doctors or lawyers or engineers or clergy. Those professions were not welcoming to them. Fortunately, we've come a long way since then, but discrimination, although it's subtle, still remains. Roe v. Wade is under constant threat as male-dominated legislatures try to tell us what we can do with our bodies. In offices, women who criticize male bosses may find themselves quietly ostracized. Although there are now many female doctors, very few attain the lofty specialty of surgery. Women, although working, still find themselves responsible for most of childcare, and women are still earning, on average, only 80% of what men earn for the same work.
I graduated in 1983 with a civil engineering degree, and at that time only 2% of engineers were women. I encountered quite a bit of discrimination at the workplace. I was turned down for jobs because I had a child, and I was overlooked for advancements because men in the office were given first consideration. Despite all this, I had an exciting and interesting career, but by my estimation, I made about 80% of the salary of that of my male counterparts. Today, about 20% of engineers are women, and even though this is a substantial increase over the 2%, it's not enough. Programs exist for kindergarten through 12th grade to provide engineering and science curriculum to young girls. We need to support these emerging engineers so their experience, education, and innovation is not hampered in the workplace. The Equal Rights Amendment is a giant step forward for women and help those who have technical degrees or any kind of career get the support they need and deserve to succeed.
So what is the ERA? Short and sweet, the ERA says it's the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The effort to protect women's rights has been a 97-year battle. In 1923, a woman by the name of Alice Paul drafted the first version of the ERA, 1923, and it was drafted shortly after women won the right to vote. And women were very aware at that time, because they'd been denied the right to vote for so many decades, that women are discriminated against. And they feared that if women weren't protected in the Constitution, that discrimination would continue. And amazingly, to our founding fathers did not believe that women were equal to men. Back when the United States was founded, women could not own property, they couldn't vote, they couldn't sign documents. They just were not considered equal to men. And then in 1875, the Supreme Court improved things a little bit. They said that women belonged to a special category of non-voting citizens. So we were considered a special category, but not equal. And since 1923, when Alice Paul first introduced the ERA, there was a lot of pressure to get Congress to support it. It took from 1923 to 1972, almost 50 years, for Congress to finally pass the ERA. The House passed it in 71, and then the Senate passed it in 72. But before the ERA can become a part of the Constitution, 38 states have to ratify it, and they were given until 1979 to ratify the ERA. Unfortunately, 1979 came and went, wasn't passed. Even though at this time there's bipartisan support, it still didn't pass. 35 of the necessary 38 states ratified it. So Congress actually extended the deadline 3 more years to 1982, thinking that the ERA might pass then. 1982 came and went, still no ERA. And it seemed like the ERA had pretty much died at that point. Why didn't the ERA pass by 1982? Why wasn't there enough states to ratify it? Well, in the early 70s to mid-70s, it was a bipartisan issue, and things changed around the latter part of the 1970s, early 80s, and the conservative population became very opposed to women's issues. They started focusing more on religion and preserving tradition and preserving family values. And at that time, there was a woman by the name of Phyllis Schlafly who was very articulate and convinced, well, she started a campaign to oppose the ERA because she knew the deadline was coming up for it for the 38 states to ratify it. So she was on this campaign to make women afraid to support the ERA. She used arguments like, well, if the ERA is passed, women will lose their alimony. If the ERA is passed, women will be expected to bring home half the earnings. It won't be up to the husband. Women would have to provide equally financially. If the ERA was passed, women would be drafted and they would have to be sent into combat. And this was on the heels of the ending of the Vietnam War, so that was a kind of a sore spot with people. But because of her zeal, the ERA was defeated, and everybody thought it was a dead issue. But then, because of the Me Too movement and the focus on women getting equal pay for equal work, there's been a resurgence in the ERA. And thankfully, this past January, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the ERA. Problem is, the deadline expired in 1982. So we're hoping that Congress will pass an amendment or a bill to say that we don't have to have a deadline to pass the ERA or to extend the deadline again. Our own Senator Jon Tester actually co-sponsored a bill to go to the Senate. It's called SJR 6, that's Senate Joint Resolution number 6. And that proposes that there not be a deadline to ratify the ERA so that it can become part of the Constitution. One of the things that the League of Women Voters is asking is that people contact Jon Tester, call him or write to him, email him, and thank him for supporting the ERA and for co-sponsoring this bill. And the League of Women Voters also is hoping that people will contact Senator Steve Daines and ask him to please support the ERA and to vote in favor of SJR 6 when it comes in front of the Senate. We're now going to hear from a couple of students who want to tell you about why the ERA is important to them.
I'm Kylie Florsinger, and I am a student to be at MSU. I grew up hearing that women get paid less than men, and it has always shocked me. Women shouldn't be looked at as lesser in any form. We deserve to be compensated equally. I don't want the wage gap to affect me or any woman trying to run a household or raise a child. I am going to college so I can get a professional job. I am paying the same tuition as male students, and I'm going to the same classes as male students, so I expect the same pay as male students. And this is why I wholeheartedly support the ERA.
Hi, I'm Jessie Songer, and I'm a senior at Helena High. Across the nation today, there are more men than women leading top corporations. In 2018, only 22% of women filled CEO positions in over 1,000 top corporations, and only 20% of them filled seats on the board of directors of American corporations. In the business world, opportunities are unfairly balanced between men and women, and going into the workforce, I expect the same opportunities as men going into the workforce to lead me up the ladder and to control the organizations that I am a part of. This is one of the reasons I support the ERA.
For more information on the ERA, you can go to the League of Women Voters website, and it's posted on the slide on your TV screen.